A millionaire hears a girl singing in the town square, approaches her, and is shocked by what she tells him. Douglas was a man of great wealth. Anyone who saw him walking the streets of London in the late afternoon would never imagine that, inside, he felt so lonely. Surrounded by luxurious cars, expensive clothes, and a life of comfort, Douglas was always admired by those who knew him only superficially. But deep down, he felt empty. That afternoon, the sunset painted the London sky in golden and orange hues. People hurried home, while Douglas walked slowly through the city's elegant streets, lost in distant thoughts. He had everything money could buy, yet something was missing. It was as if every step he took pushed him further away from what truly mattered. What exactly? He wasn't quite sure. Douglas thought about how his life seemed colorless, despite all the luxury. He had a mansion that resembled a castle, but the walls of that place held no laughter, no love or warmth. There was no one waiting for him when he arrived home. Lately, he found himself asking more and more, what's the point of all this if I feel so alone deep down? As the shadows of the city began to stretch and the streetlights flickered on, Douglas observed the people around him. Some families laughed together, while other couples strolled hand in hand. He watched them with a mix of envy and sadness because, despite having so much, what he longed for most was out of reach. True affection, a sense of belonging, and a connection with someone who cared for him, not for his money, but for the man he was. Deep down, Douglas knew he had lost himself in the pursuit of success. He had built empires, but allowed them to steal his soul. Now, walking the streets of London, he felt that his life, filled with promises, was like an empty house. It was hard to admit, but he was tired of the loneliness that surrounded him, as if it were part of his own skin. As he walked, a soft melody reached his ears, something so pure that it interrupted his dark thoughts. He paused for a moment, trying to locate the source of the music. The sound was different from anything he had heard before. It didn't come from a shop or a professional musician. It was a song that seemed to emanate directly from a heart. Douglas didn't yet realize it, but that song would be the turning point in his life. While Douglas walked, lost in his thoughts, something unexpected made him stop. Suddenly, a gentle melody began to fill the air, like a breeze that softly invades the surroundings. The music was simple, without grand chords or effects, but there was something about it that touched him deeply. It was as if each note carried an ancient emotion, something that spoke directly to the heart without the need for complicated words. For a moment, Douglas completely forgot his worries. He looked around, trying to figure out where that pure music was coming from. In front of him, amidst the constant movement of the square, his eyes caught sight of a scene he never expected to find. There, sitting on the ground, was a fragile-looking little girl. She had curly hair that swayed gently in the wind, and she wore old, worn-out clothes that clearly had seen better days. In her lap, she held an even older guitar, with worn strings, but somehow it produced such beautiful music that it was hard to believe it came from an instrument in such poor condition. The girl, whom he would later learn was named Louisa, seemed to be in her own world. Her eyes were closed as she sang, and her expression was peaceful, almost as if she were sharing a secret with the wind. Louisa's voice, delicate and sweet, filled the square, capturing the attention of passers-by. It wasn't a loud or impressive voice like those of the great singers Douglas was used to seeing at lavish shows, but there was something different about it. There was a hidden strength in that softness, something that spoke of a life filled with deep emotions. Douglas stood frozen, almost breathless, watching the scene. He had never seen anything like it. That small being, so humble and simple, sang with an emotion he had never experienced despite all his wealth. It was as if, for a few minutes, the girl was sharing her pains and hopes with the world, asking nothing in return, simply offering what she held most precious. Her music, the square, which had once seemed so ordinary and gray to Douglas, suddenly burst into color and life. He felt something stir within him, something that had long been dormant. Louisa's music, with its simplicity and beauty, touched him in a way he couldn't explain. He found himself completely mesmerized by the scene. Douglas, the man who had everything, now felt small before that girl with her old guitar. She possessed something he could never buy, the ability to move people with her soul. With each note, each word that left her mouth, it was as if she was sharing a part of her own story. In that moment, Douglas knew he needed to talk to her. Something in that music had awakened a part of him he didn't even know existed. As Douglas watched Louisa play and sing, a feeling of sadness began to mix with the admiration he felt for her music. The gentle melody, laden with emotions, stood in stark contrast to the girl's reality. Her clothes were tattered, almost torn in places, with stains that revealed their wear. It wasn't the kind of clothing one would expect to see on such a young child. She seemed undernourished, with thin arms and a slightly pale face. Yet, despite this, there was something extraordinary about her. It was as if her music transcended the hardships she clearly faced. Douglas, who until that moment had been immersed in his own solitude, began to feel the weight of Louisa's situation. How could someone so young, so fragile, express such beauty and emotion through music while living in such difficult conditions? It was a paradox he couldn't comprehend. Each note she played seemed stronger, more sincere, as if she were communicating not just with the square around her, but with the whole world. The music was her way of existing, of connecting, of showing that despite poverty and hardships, there was something in her soul that no difficult situation could take away from her. Douglas felt deeply moved. He, who had always had everything and had never known what it was like to lack anything material, was now faced with a reality that made him question many things. Why did such a young child have to face life this way? And why, even amidst misery, was she able to offer something so pure and beautiful to the world? The contrast between Louisa's music and her appearance was striking. As her fingers strummed the guitar, Douglas's eyes were drawn to the small details. The girl's nails were dirty, and her hands bore the marks of someone who likely worked or lived in difficult situations. He imagined she spent hours on the streets, perhaps with nowhere to go, without a safe place to call home. And yet, there she was, with a talent that could touch the heart of anyone who stopped to listen. For a moment, the millionaire felt powerless. All the money he had, all his possessions, seemed insufficient to compensate for what that girl was going through. He couldn't stop thinking, how could something so beautiful flourish in such a barren environment? Douglas felt a tightening in his heart. He, who had always believed that money could solve everything, was now faced with a situation where no amount of wealth seemed capable of making a difference. The music that had initially enchanted him now also saddened him, not because it lacked beauty, but because it was a constant reminder of life's injustices. Douglas knew that many children like Louisa would not have a real chance to showcase their talents, that they would not have an opportunity to live fully. But there was something special about Louisa. She didn't seem to ask for anything other than to be heard. And in that moment, Douglas knew that something in his life would change forever. Driven by curiosity and an impulse he couldn't control, Douglas decided to approach the girl. Something in her music, in that scene so simple yet so powerful, drew him closer. Each step he took toward the girl felt heavier, not because of the physical distance, but because of the emotional weight forming within him. When he finally got close enough, he hesitated for a second. The millionaire, who was used to having control over everything in his life, felt vulnerable in front of that child. She was small, with her curly hair falling over her face, and her concentration on the guitar was so intense that she seemed not to notice Douglas's presence. He then took a deep breath and, with a gentle voice, asked, "What's your name?" The girl slowly lifted her eyes, as if waking from a dream. And when her eyes met Douglas's, she smiled, a shy, almost bashful smile that carried an unexpected sweetness. "My name is Louisa," she replied with a soft, childlike voice that sounded as pure as the music she had just played. That simplicity disarmed him completely. Douglas, who was used to dealing with powerful, influential people always full of their own interests, now found himself facing a girl who expected nothing from him. Louisa had no idea who he was. To her, he was just another man among many passing through the square. And yet, she was cordial, unafraid, and without malice. The millionaire felt a tightness in his chest. There was something about Louisa that reminded him of an innocence he had lost long ago. Perhaps it was her childhood, or maybe it was the simplicity with which she approached life. In just a few seconds, Douglas realized that everything he valued, money, power, prestige, seemed utterly meaningless at that moment. All that mattered was that genuine connection that was beginning to form. "Why are you singing here?" he asked, still curious but also cautious, trying not to seem intrusive. Louisa hesitated for a moment. Her fingers glided over the guitar strings, as if she were trying to find the right words. The smile gradually faded, replaced by a more serious but still calm expression. "I like to sing," she said, as if the answer were obvious. "And this is a good place. People sometimes stop to listen, and that makes me happy." Douglas hadn't expected that answer. He imagined the girl would be there out of necessity, perhaps trying to earn some money. But she asked for nothing. There was no hat on the ground or donation box. She sang for something much greater, something he still didn't fully understand, but that intrigued him deeply. As he looked at Louisa, Douglas began to realize that what he had found was much more than just a beautiful voice. There was a truth in those simple words, a truth that he, with all his wealth, couldn't grasp. Douglas was still enchanted by Louisa's soft voice, but something inside him made him want to know more. The music that had initially drawn him and now seemed only the surface of something much deeper. He leaned in a little closer, still moved by emotion, and with a low, gentle voice, asked, "Why are you playing here, Louisa?" He expected a simple answer. Perhaps something like, "Because I like to sing," or "Because I like to see people happy." But what he heard next shook his emotions in a way he wasn't prepared for. Louisa hesitated for a moment. Her fingers, which had moved so confidently over the guitar strings, now seemed a bit uncertain. She looked down, as if reorganizing her thoughts, searching for the courage to share something she didn't usually talk about with strangers. After a few seconds of silence, she took a deep breath and looked at Douglas with an expression that seemed to carry years of pain, something no child her age should have. "I play here because it's the only way I can help my mom," she said, with a sincerity so pure that it made Douglas feel a pang in his heart. He fell silent, waiting for her to continue. His curiosity had turned into concern, and he now realized that that simple question had opened a door to something much more serious. "My mom is sick," Louisa continued, her voice trembling. "She can't work anymore. I come here because sometimes people give me a few coins. It's not much, but it helps buy her medicine." The shy smile that had once lit up Louisa's face had completely disappeared. Now, she looked like just a tired child, carrying a burden much greater than she should have been. Douglas felt a lump in his throat. He, a man with more money than he knew what to do with, was facing a girl who was struggling to scrape together the bare minimum to care for her mother. The reality of the situation hit him like a blow. Everything he considered important, his businesses, his possessions, his status, seemed insignificant compared to what that child faced every day. "Do you come here every day?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but the tone of concern was unavoidable. Louisa slowly nodded, her large, sad eyes reflecting a life of sacrifice that didn't match her age. "Almost every day. Sometimes we don't even have money for bread, so I try to help. Music, it's the only thing I know how to do." Her words echoed in Douglas's mind. He looked around, seeing people rushing through the square, many not even noticing the girl with her guitar. And there he was, a man with all the resources to transform both her life and her mother's, yet still paralyzed by a mix of emotion and disbelief. That revelation shocked him in a way he hadn't expected. Douglas, who had everything, was now standing in front of a girl who, despite her poverty and all her struggles, had a pure heart and extraordinary courage. She didn't lament her situation. She didn't directly ask for help. She just did what she could, the only way she knew how, with a strength that was astonishing for someone so young. Douglas felt he needed to do something. A man used to solving problems with money What could he do for this child? He knew that this was a situation that couldn't be fixed with just a donation. What Louisa needed was much more than that. As the silence between them stretched on, Douglas knew that this encounter had changed something within him. Louisa wasn't just a girl he stumbled upon playing in the square. She was a symbol of resilience, courage, and a kind of strength he had never known before. And in that moment, Douglas made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let Louisa and her mother face this alone. Douglas looked at the girl in front of him, still bewildered by the sweetness of her voice and the strength of her presence. The serenity of Louisa, such a young girl, seemed incompatible with the reality she faced. He couldn't take his eyes off her as the soft melody she played on the guitar still echoed in his ears. Moved by the need to understand what lay behind this scene, he gently asked, "Why do you sing here every day?" Louisa, with the same serenity she had shown while playing, lowered her eyes to the old guitar in her hands. Her fingers slowly glided over the worn strings, as if those strings were the only thing she could control in her life. She took a deep breath before answering, as if the words carried a weight she was already used to carrying alone. "I sing to try to raise some money," she began, with a calm that seemed to have been earned through the necessity of being strong. "My mom is very sick, and we can't afford the medicine and treatment she needs." Douglas felt his heart tighten. He knew he was about to hear something difficult, but he couldn't have imagined the impact those few words would have. He, a man used to seeing the world through figures and multimillion-dollar transactions, now found himself facing a raw and painful reality that couldn't be ignored. "Every day I come here, hoping that people will give me a few coins," Louisa continued, glancing at the hurried pedestrians passing through the square. "Sometimes, I manage to get enough to buy the medicine she needs. Other times, just bread for dinner." The way she spoke, without complaints, without anger, just with a calm acceptance, deeply moved Douglas. He could feel the pain embedded in Louisa's words, but there was also an impressive strength, a strength that was hard for him to comprehend. After all, how could someone so young face such a huge burden with such dignity? She looked back at Douglas, with a small smile, trying to mask the sadness in her eyes. "My mom always tells me that when we put love into what we do, things can get better. So I sing with all the love I have. I sing so that she can get better, so that we can have a chance to be happy again." Douglas was momentarily speechless. The simple and direct truth of that girl, the faith she placed in music and the hope of getting help, was something he didn't know how to process. He, who had always saw problems with money, felt small in the face of this situation. The contrast between Louisa's delicacy and the harshness of her reality hit him like a blow. While he, a millionaire, lived surrounded by luxury and abundance, that child fought daily to secure the basics for her mother. There was no glamour in her life, only a silent struggle wrapped in heartfelt songs. The square, which had previously seemed just a beautiful place under the sunset, now transformed into a scene filled with meaning. Louisa's music was not just a melody. It was a silent cry of resistance, love, and hope. Douglas, who sought a greater purpose in his own life, now found himself confronted with the true essence of what it meant to fight for someone you love. "Do you come here every day?" he asked, almost without realizing that his voice was laden with emotion. Louisa nodded, still maintaining her serene posture. "Yes, every day, until my mom gets better. I can't stop now. She needs me, and this is what I can do for her." Douglas looked at her, and for a moment, he saw something more. He saw a strength that went far beyond her age, a love that transcended difficulties. And in that instant, he realized that this girl, with her silent courage, had touched something in him that no amount of money could ever buy. Louisa's words struck Douglas like a lightning bolt, an electric shock that swept through his emotions with the force of a storm. He, a man who had always sailed through calm seas of wealth and privilege, now found himself submerged in a reality he had never imagined. While his life was filled with meetings in luxurious conference rooms and sophisticated dinners, Louisa faced a kind of pain he only knew from distant stories. In an instant, he found himself reflecting on his own existence. The soft music still echoing in his ears now seemed like a deep lament, an echo of the silent struggle of a girl who just wanted to save her mother. The pain Louisa shared was not just about her mother's illness. It was about uncertainty, loneliness, and the relentless search for hope amid an unyielding reality. Douglas, who thought he had everything, began to question what it truly meant to live. He had built an empire, surrounded by wealth and achievements, but now the emptiness that accompanied him became more apparent. Every medal, every luxury car, every elegant house he owned seemed devoid of meaning in the face of that little girl. He realized that, despite having enough money to buy the world, he could never purchase the courage and determination that shone in Louisa's eyes. Douglas, who once felt so powerful, now felt powerless. He didn't have the right words to comfort her, but he felt an increasing need to do something. It was as if the pain Louisa carried intertwined with his own loneliness, revealing a void he could no longer ignore. He began to understand that, behind the facade of his success, there was a man who felt alone, lost in a sea of material possessions. While Louisa's life revolved around the fight for her mother's life, Douglas's life had become a repetition of meaningless days, filled with commitments that didn't fulfill him. He had forgotten what it felt like to have his heart race with emotion, the simple joy of a shared laugh, or the comfort of a sincere hug. The harsh truth was that he, too, was searching for something to make him feel alive again. The gentle afternoon breeze brushed their faces as Douglas looked at Louisa, her determination lighting up the square around them. He remembered his childhood when he dreamed of changing the world. Where were those dreams now? They were buried under the weight of expectations and responsibilities he had imposed on himself. What had happened to his compassion, to his desire to help others? "I never knew," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "I never knew there was so much pain around us." Louisa looked at him with curiosity, as if she were sensing the fragility behind the appearance of a man who seemed to have it all. She hadn't expected her words to have such an impact, but in that moment, she was also awakening something profound within him. The child, who should have been enjoying the innocence of childhood, had become a doorway to a new perspective for Douglas. Louisa's struggle was not just a battle for survival. It was a powerful reminder that, deep down, we are all connected in our struggles. He understood that true wealth is not measured in material possessions, but in the ability to love and care for others. And so, with a tight heart and misty eyes, Douglas decided he needed to do something for that girl and her mother. He could not allow the pain he felt to transform into mere silent compassion. Something inside him cried out for action, for change. He was ready to be part of the solution, starting with Louisa. In that moment of revelation, he began to glimpse the possibility of finding the purpose he had long sought in his life. Douglas, with a tight heart and a new determination burning within him, knew that this moment would change his life forever. Louisa's music still reverberated in his ears, a melody that now echoed far beyond the notes she had played. It was a song of hope, struggle, and love that propelled him to act. He looked into the eyes of the girl, which shone with an innocence that contrasted with the weight of her reality. And with every fiber of his being, he made a decision. "Louisa," Douglas began, his voice trembling slightly, "I promise I will help your mother." These words came from his mouth like a solemn vow, a commitment that seemed to resonate not only with the girl, but with the universe around him. He knew that promises were typically sealed with contracts and signatures, but now he spoke from the heart, a heart that, until that moment, had been so cautious. Louisa, still wearing her shy smile, looked at him with a mix of hope and disbelief. She, who faced so many challenges daily, was used to receiving empty promises, but something in the way Douglas spoke made her heart leap with hope. He was not just a wealthy and powerful man. There was something different about him, something that made her believe he could fulfill what he promised. Douglas continued, his voice laden with emotion, "And I won't stop there. I want to take care of you and your family to ensure that you never have to go through hardships again." As he spoke these words, he felt a wave of responsibility and affection flood his being. It was as if the weight of the world, which he had carried for years, began to dissipate. He was not merely promising money or medical treatment. He was offering a future, a new beginning, and more importantly, a safe place for Louisa and her mother. Louisa's expression changed. Now, she was not just a scared girl struggling to survive, but a young woman beginning to glimpse the possibility of a different tomorrow. A tomorrow where her mother could receive the medical care she needed, where she would no longer have to sing in the squares to scrape together a few coins, but where she could, perhaps one day, dream of a future full of opportunities. Her eyes lit up, and a broader smile began to spread across her face, the very smile that Douglas wanted to see always. "Would you really do that?" Louisa asked, her voice a mix of hope and surprise. Her tone was pure, like a ray of light breaking through dark clouds. Douglas nodded, determined. What once seemed like a small gesture was now becoming a sacred pact between them, a bond that went beyond words. "I will do whatever it takes," Douglas replied, determination pulsing in his voice. "We will face this together, Louisa. Your mother will get the treatment she needs, and I will be here to help you with everything. We will find a way to improve your lives. You and your mother deserve so much more than what you have now." As the conversation flowed, Douglas began to see Louisa's potential. A girl full of dreams and hopes, yet who had not yet found a way to realize them. The image of her and her mother living in difficult conditions became unbearable for him. It had to change, and he knew he had the resources and strength to make a difference. Douglas's heart beat with a new rhythm, one that connected him not only to that girl, but to a greater purpose. He realized that true happiness did not lie in accumulating wealth, but in using what he had to help others. There, under the blue sky of the square, he was not just making a promise. He was embarking on a new journey. He was reconnecting with his own humanity, discovering the joy of caring for and protecting those in need. "Let's get started right now," he said, with a confident smile. "First, we need to ensure your mother gets the necessary treatment. Then we'll see what else you and your family need. I will be with you every step of the way." Louisa smiled, her innocence lighting up the afternoon, as Douglas felt that a new chapter was about to unfold. They were in this fight together, united by a destiny that had been uncertain until now, but seemed clearer than ever. He was ready to fight for Louisa and her mother, not just for them but for himself as well. Because in that act of love and solidarity, he had found true wealth. Douglas and Louisa walked together down the sidewalk, and each step he took beside the little girl filled his heart with a new warmth, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The blue sky stretched above them, and birds sang in the trees, as if celebrating that unexpected moment. The square, which had once been just a thoroughfare for him, was now becoming a landmark in his life. Louisa's music still echoed in his mind, reminding him of the purity and strength of hope. After a few minutes of walking, they arrived at an old but well-kept building, with walls painted a faded yellow and flowers in the windows. The aroma of home-cooked food wafted through the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter and voices rising from within. Douglas felt a tightening in his chest. This was where Louisa lived with her mother, and the thought of entering that simple house and meeting the woman who had given birth to such a special girl made him anxious. As they crossed the threshold, they were welcomed by a small hallway adorned with photos of Louisa at different stages of her life. Douglas admired the images, noting the girl's genuine smile in each one. It was evident that the house, though modest, overflowed with love and warmth. Louisa turned to Douglas and said, "Mom must be in the kitchen. I'll go get her." With a sparkle in her eyes, she dashed to the kitchen while Douglas stood still, absorbing the cozy atmosphere of the home. Soon, Louisa reappeared, tugging her mother's hand, a woman who looked fragile but radiated impressive strength. Her light brown hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her pale skin revealed the toll of illness. However, what stood out the most was a glimmer in her eyes, filled with love and pride for her daughter. "Mom, look who's here," Louisa said excitedly. "This is Douglas. He wants to help us." Louisa's mother, known as Donna Maria, looked at Douglas, surprised and emotional. "Help," she repeated, her voice soft like a breeze. "What do you mean?" Her expression was a mix of disbelief and hope. Douglas, sensing the gravity of the moment, decided to introduce himself honestly and warmly. "Hello, Donna Maria," he began, smiling gently. "I met your daughter in the square and she touched me with her music. When I learned that you were going through difficulties, I felt I needed to help. I want to make sure you get the treatment you need." Douglas's words fell like balm upon Donna Maria, who stood frozen for a moment. Tears began to well in her eyes, and she turned to Louisa, who watched anxiously, not fully grasping the depth of what was happening. "Oh my God, my daughter," Donna Maria said, overwhelmed with emotion. "I didn't expect a stranger to want to help us like this. This is a gift I can't believe I'm receiving." She approached Douglas, and in a gesture overflowing with gratitude, took his hands in hers. Thank you for seeing value in us. Please come in, sit down." Douglas found himself enveloped in the simplicity and warm hospitality of this woman. He sat down at the table, and Louisa quickly settled beside him, her contagious energy and joy filling the room. Donna Maria brought out some homemade cookies, still warm, and offered a glass of fruit juice she had just made. "You're an amazing mother, Donna Maria," Douglas said as he savored a cookie. "Louisa is such a talented and strong girl. Her music touched me deeply." Donna Maria smiled, her eyes lighting up. "She is my light. Even though I'm sick, Louisa always makes me laugh and reminds me of what truly matters in life. We are facing hardships, but the love we have for each other is greater than any challenge." The conversation flowed, and Douglas listened intently as Donna Maria shared stories about Louisa's childhood, her first words, and how music had always been an escape and a source of joy. The connection between them deepened with each exchanged word, and Douglas felt a new sense of purpose emerging within him. He realized that behind the simplicity of the apartment lay a fortress made of love, hope, and resilience. Donna Maria and Louisa's struggle resonated with his own life, reminding him that even those who seem to have everything can feel an inexplicable void. And there, in that small home, surrounded by laughter and stories, he found not only a mission, but a new way to look at the world. When the conversation came to an end, Donna Maria, still with tears in her eyes, said, "I never thought I would receive help from someone like you one day. I just hope my daughter has a bright future. What you did for us today is a miracle." Douglas, touched by her words, simply smiled. He didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, he felt he had finally found a place for his generosity to flourish. He was determined to do everything he could to help that family, not just as a millionaire, but as a human being reconnecting with what truly mattered in life: love, compassion, and hope. With Douglas's determination, Donna Maria and Louisa's lives began to change for the better. The first thing he did was take them to a hospital where the best doctors were available, ready to help. As they entered the hospital, the atmosphere was different from what Douglas was used to. Although he had visited many hospitals in his life, this one was special, filled with hope and life, where every patient had a unique story. Donna Maria was received with care and attention, and soon the nurses began to tend to her, performing tests and ensuring everything was in order. As the medical team prepared for the treatment, Douglas watched Louisa, who stood beside her mother, holding her hand with a look of determination. He felt that the little girl had a special sparkle in her eyes, a glimmer that showed she still believed in better days. After a few weeks of treatment, the improvements in Donna Maria's health became visible. The color returned to her face, and the energy that once seemed lost began to resurge. Douglas not only helped with her medical treatment, but also brought a bit of joy into their home. He decided that every week he would make a visit, bringing small gifts and surprises for Louisa and her mother, from fresh flowers to storybooks. He wanted them to know they were not alone. During one of these visits, Douglas found Louisa in a moment of joy. She was rehearsing a new song, and the delicate melody filled the apartment with a light energy. Hearing the sweet voice of the girl, Douglas couldn't help but smile. She sang about dreams, hope, and the joy of having her mother by her side. Louisa, with her charming demeanor, always had something special to share, and Douglas began to understand how those little things made all the difference in their lives. Over time, the relationship between Douglas and the family grew stronger. He became an important figure not only for Louisa, but also for Donna Maria. Their gratitude was palpable, and Douglas began to realize that each smile and each gesture of affection from them filled a void he had carried for years. It was as if those two women had taught him something valuable about life and love. As he watched Donna Maria's recovery, Douglas began to reflect on his own life. He realized that his fortune and success had never brought him the happiness he was experiencing now. True wealth, he understood, wasn't in the material possessions he had accumulated over the years, but in the ability to impact the lives of others. He discovered that the best memories were not from lavish parties or first-class trips, but from the laughter and moments shared with Louisa and her mother. One afternoon, while sitting at the table with them as Donna Maria brewed fresh coffee, Douglas gathered his courage and spoke. "You have taught me something I never knew before. What really matters in life are the people around us and the ability to make a difference. I want to do more for you and for others in need." Donna Maria smiled, her eyes shining. "Douglas, you've already done so much for us. Your heart is a treasure, and that's what we value most. You have brought hope and happiness back into our lives." Louisa, listening to the conversation, looked at Douglas and said, "I want to sing so the whole world knows how wonderful you are. You're a hero, Douglas." Those words touched the depths of Douglas's soul. He realized that in a short time, he had become a fundamental part of their lives, and the feeling it gave him was indescribable. It was more than gratitude. It was true love and a connection that transcended any family ties. In the following months, with Douglas's continued support, Donna Maria made a full recovery and returned to doing small things that once brought her joy, like gardening and cooking. Louisa, now full of confidence and hope, decided she wanted to pursue a career in music, dreaming of sharing her songs with the world. Douglas, always present, helped enroll her in singing lessons and took the mother and daughter to local shows, where Louisa began to perform. At one of those shows, when Louisa took the stage and began to sing, Douglas was there in the audience, his heart overflowing with pride. He had never felt so alive. He applauded with all his might, knowing he was witnessing not only Louisa's transformation, but also his own life's transformation. The love and gratitude he received were more valuable than any wealth money could buy. Douglas had become part of Louisa and Donna Maria's story, and now his own story was being rewritten. He dedicated himself to helping other families in similar situations, creating a foundation in Louisa's name that promoted health and education for underprivileged children. The impact of his actions began to spread, and soon he found himself surrounded by a new circle of friends and allies who shared the same vision of making a difference in the world. As time passed, the gratitude and love from Louisa and her mother became the greatest reward Douglas could imagine. He had found his purpose, and this made him realize that true happiness lies in generosity and the ability to touch the lives of others, creating bonds that last forever. He no longer saw himself as a lonely man surrounded by wealth, but as part of a family united by love, hope, and the certainty that together they could face any challenge.